All right, I'm back. So I just had that question that said she thinks that I say 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, but what if you're obese or overweight? Like, do you still follow that rule? First of all, protein is very relative to the person. Having too much protein is just as bad as having too little, and so I think it's very important to take your temperatures and pulses, take your symptoms into account, and kind of get your protein figured out according to that, because you don't need necessarily 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Anywhere from 0.6 grams of protein to a 1 whole gram can be a good place to be. So it really just depends. And I just never recommend eating beneath 90 grams of protein a day. I think it's better to have more like 100 to 130, but if you're in Fully Nourished, in the Fully Nourished recipe book, there's actually kind of a protein guide for where your body weight is at and then activity levels. So if you need more, it kind of gives you a range to focus on, and then you can kind of manipulate accordingly. But I don't really recommend 1 gram per pound of body weight as a rule. It's just more like anywhere from 0.6 grams to 1 gram per pound of body weight usually is a good idea. And the more you weigh, the more protein you do require. Doesn't mean you need excessive amounts, but you are going to need a little bit more. Best way to eat liver. If you can't eat it at all, you can do a desiccated liver capsule, or you can take raw liver. I'm sorry, Samson's chewing a bone, so if it's you can hear him chewing, that's what it is. Or you can take a piece of liver and cut it into capsule-sized pieces, and then freeze it for 2 weeks so it kills anything that could possibly be in there, and then just take it like a capsule. Just swallow a frozen piece of liver like it was a pill. You can't really taste it that way. Or if you truly like to eat liver, like liver and onions is really popular. Pate is really popular. So if you want to eat it, a pate is usually the easiest way to eat it, and then liver and onions tends to be the best. Can progesterone really cause hallucinations? Depending on, this is where it's not progesterone causing, it's what progesterone is doing. If a woman has incredibly high amounts of toxins, heavy metals, estrogens in her tissues, and she begins to supplement progesterone without actually supporting her liver, doing any other work, she hasn't done any other work besides just supplementing progesterone, and she starts to mobilize all that junk in her body, and her body cannot carry it out properly, absolutely. But it's not the progesterone causing hallucinations. It's the heavy metals, it's the copper, it's the iron, it's possibly the estrogen and the serotonin. And so when you take progesterone and your body is not prepared for it, meaning you're not eating well, you're not balancing your blood sugar, you're not sleeping, you're not supporting liver detoxification, you're not taking care of yourself, then absolutely what the progesterone is mobilizing can cause just about anything. It can cause you to feel like you're going crazy, but copper in particularly can cause hallucinations and the feeling of going crazy. My minerals were recently tested in a blood test. Is this less accurate than a hair mineral analysis, or can I rely on the blood test numbers too? You can't rely on blood tests because, and this is why, and it's not because I'm like, blood tests are bad. Blood tests for minerals is really going to be very inaccurate because the body pulls from the cells in order to keep blood levels really stable. So you have to be in a really bad place to see your blood level minerals imbalanced. For example, once you have low potassium on a blood test, dude, your cells are wrecked for potassium. You get what I'm saying? So a hair tissue mineral analysis is going to show intracellular mineral function, whereas a blood test is not really going to be accurate because the body is going to pull from those cells to keep the blood levels of minerals stable. So I don't really like the blood test for minerals. I don't think it's accurate, and I find that once the blood test is abnormal, the cells have already been depleted for sometimes years. Why would B vitamins worsen nerve pain? I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on, but you'd have to look at the whole picture. If you have gut issues, that could be a problem. B vitamins can sometimes act as prebiotics. If your liver is really poorly detoxifying, if you have a methylation problem, you have MTHFR or something like that, taking unmethylated B vitamins can sometimes be a problem. So there's unlimited amounts of things that could be going on. But if, the bottom line is if something's worsening nerve pain, there's a reason, and it's probably not a good idea to take it. What would you use to offer relief to your 6-week-old with thrush while solving the why? Not medical advice, asking to support a friend. Trying to think, is she breastfeeding? That would be kind of my first question, is if she's breastfeeding. If she's breastfeeding, sometimes you can take things internally for your own candida, because if your baby has thrush, you got yeast. So sometimes you can take some things to calm yeast in your body, and it will pass into the breast milk and help with the child as well. What else? Was the baby C-section born or breastfed or vaginally born? That's another thing that can completely change. So if it was vaginally born, you can assume that, keep in mind, the mom's bacteria gets passed to the baby through the vaginal canal. And so at that point, you can kind of suspect, okay, like thrush has been passed from me to the baby. And then, is the baby being breastfed? That's the second question, because it's like if formula has a bunch of iron in it, and iron feeds bacteria and yeast, and so that can cause thrush to become worse, because there's a reason why babies are only fed milk for a very long time. They have very sterile guts, and they're very susceptible to pathogens, yeast, bacterial overgrowth, and so milk has something called lactoferrin in it, which binds to iron. Milk is iron free for a reason. We don't want to feed newborn babies iron, and so you want to get to a point where their guts have been proliferated properly before they get anything that has iron in it. So that's a long way of saying I'm not really sure. I'd have to know the situation more, but you can look into natural options that would pass those antifungal properties from the mom to the baby. How to get organ meats like liver into the diet if it grosses me out. I would start with something simple like desiccated liver in a capsule, like Ancestral Supplements brand. If you just can't do it, I would warm up to it just by taking the pill, just because that's an easy way to go about it. When I give him a magnesium bath, it also flares up, so my thought is perhaps heavy metals due to the V word. Going to run a heavy metals blood test and other suggestions if it comes back that they're up. Oh, yeah. So sometimes if a child or an adult is not reacting to magnesium well, they're just in a really depleted state. And so you sometimes have to go really low and slow. For example, maybe if you're using a cup of Epsom salts, you need to use a fourth a cup. Or if you're using a spray of magnesium, you need to use a drop. Just very, very gentle. But I would suspect that could be a possibility. And I would definitely run a test and see. Remember that if you did an HTMA test, sometimes heavy metals don't show up at first when the first levels of minerals are not balanced. So for example, if somebody's very depleted in magnesium, they're not going to move metals until their magnesium levels get up. And so sometimes it can take 2 or 3 retests of that hair tissue until the body starts to actually push metals out of the system, and it will show up in the hair. So that's just me, hair tissue mineral analysis doesn't always just show you right away you have all these metals in the body, because they're not going to move out of the hair just all of a sudden, especially if the metabolism is working really, really slow. So that's just a note, but yeah, I would say it's probably a good idea to test for heavy metals. My mineral levels were tested recently in a blood test. How does a blood test compare? Oh, I already answered that question. I started eating white fish and salmon when I first came off a plant-based diet. Felt okay at first, but then started having allergic reactions, severe stomach pain, and red splotchy skin. Thoughts? Yeah, a plant-based diet is very rich in copper, very depleted in zinc. Plant-based diets can really affect digestion in a very horrible way, so it's hard to digest protein. Sometimes fish is not the best way to start. Sometimes red meat is. Or eggs or dairy is a better option than starting with fish. And then what is your fish being fed? Are you doing wild fish, or are you doing farm-raised fish with dyes and things like that? So lots of questions there, but if you're reacting to a fish, you want to look at what is that fish being fed? Is that fish wild? And are there other ingredients in that fish? A lot of times salmon is pumped full of red dye to give it an artificial red color. Can prednisone mess with magnesium levels in a blood test? Well, prednisone is a steroid, and that is like a fake cortisol. It pushes, that's how it gets inflammation down quickly. Is it is very rich in cortisol. It stimulates a stress response. So that could definitely deplete the body of minerals like magnesium and potassium and sodium. Hey girl, thoughts on cryotherapy for colitis, for inflammation in general? You guys know I'm not a fan of cold therapy or shock therapy like that, because the reason why it's so anti-inflammatory is because it stimulates a cortisol response and adrenaline response. So it's temporary anti-inflammatory for the long-term trade-off of breaking down your own tissues in the process. So I prefer getting to the root cause of colitis and inflammation over doing cryotherapy. So does protein lower or higher blood sugar? It lowers blood sugar because protein requires an insulin response. Keep in mind that protein actually requires more of an insulin response than carbohydrates do. So when we eat protein, we're lowering our blood sugar. We're allowing more sugar into the cells. When we eat carbohydrates, we're raising our blood sugar, and we need to make sure we're allowing that blood sugar into the cells. And so that's why protein and carb work so well together, is when you're eating protein, you stimulate that insulin. That insulin is that key to allow glucose into the cell, and you're allowing carbohydrates into the cell. So that's why we eat protein and carb together. Which fat source is best, raw butter or coconut oil? Ray Pete's recommendations, refined coconut oil. They're both really good. I like a mixture of both because raw butter is going to be high in those fat-soluble vitamins, vitamins A, K, a little bit of E, but mostly A and K. And coconut oil is not very rich in fat-soluble vitamins, but it's incredible for your metabolism. So they both really have a place, and there's not one or the other that's better or worse. It's just more, they're both really good, and I would get a mixture of both. Yeah, but coconut oil helps reduce abdominal fat. Remember, the reason that coconut oil is they figured out coconut oil is so pro-metabolic is there was a farmer that started feeding his pigs coconut oil to fatten them up. And he started to realize that when I fed my pigs coconut oil, they got so lean that I couldn't even slaughter them because they were like these like lean muscular machines. And so he started feeding them corn oil, and they started to fatten up really quickly. And so coconut oil, it increases the metabolism so quickly that you are going to actually lose more weight and take up more glucose. Keep in mind that using too much coconut oil can deplete vitamin A, so we got to make sure we're eating lots of fat-soluble vitamins with coconut oil, not just doing coconut oil all the time. Started eating more in line with your recommendations, gut feels better, lost 5 pounds, and got approval to come off birth control, but have noticed increased joint inflammation. Suggestions? Sometimes it will take time, guys. Remember that when you're experiencing more inflammation, you probably were running off of stress for a long period of time. Remember that one of cortisol's primary jobs, besides breaking down your tissues for fuel, is to keep inflammation low, or it's a painkiller. Why? Because when you're running from an angry bear, when you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, and you step on a rock or you step on a thorn or you break your foot, you gotta keep running or you will die, right? And so a lot of people will start to eat more pro-metabolic, they'll start to lower their stress hormones, and they start to be like, wow, my joints are really achy. I'm not feeling that great. Like I'm kind of inflamed. Like what's going on? Oh my gosh, I think I'm getting worse. And I'm like, no, you've literally been inflamed for years. You've just been running off of stress hormones, and you haven't been realizing that you are inflamed. And so sometimes it does take time to see that inflammation improve. And it's not that it just showed up. It's probably been there for years. It's just you're actually starting to feel it and see it because stress hormones are now low. You're not running off of adrenaline or cortisol anymore. So I hope that makes sense. It's not that things are getting worse. It's usually that things are getting better. It's just now you're more aware of the inflammation that's always been there. So that could also be what's happening to you, Winnan, is you've been running off of stress for so long that now like you're starting to see like, oh, my joints are super inflamed and like puffy, and the cortisol and the adrenaline has been keeping that inflammation down for you for so long, and now it's not there anymore. You're working to lower stress and increase your thyroid function, and so now the inflammation is starting to rear its ugly head. But it's not new, it's just there. It's always been there. If I enrolled in FN, am I able to talk to you about issues I've been having? No, fully nourished is not the same as working one-on-one with me. You do have access to the Facebook group, which I always go in and answer questions that involve fully nourished. But no, when you want help with personal issues, that is something that one-on-one is the only thing that I would be comfortable giving you advice, because think about it. I don't know what's going on internally. Like I require testing when someone works with me one-on-one for a reason. It's not because I'm like a mean lady that makes you spend all this money. It's because I truly can only help you if I know what's actually happening internally. I don't want you to spin your wheels. I don't want you to spend a bunch of money on supplements that you don't need. Like, the goal is to actually get you where you want to go. And to get that personalized attention, it takes a lot of my time. And to me, my time is pretty valuable at this point. So that's why it's fully nourished is not the same as going to be one-on-one attention from me. Could you clarify again benefits of organ meats and how often you should take the supplement version, please? Thank you. Yeah, so keep in mind, guys, that our liver, I know a lot of people think your liver is a filter, but it's not a filter. It's the battery pack of the body. It's where the body stores a lot of glucose. It's where the body stores a lot of nutrients to be sent to the body. The liver actually determines where nutrients will be spent and go. And so it's very rich in B vitamins, vitamins A and K, and a little bit of vitamin E is in there as well. Lots of vitamin C. Lots of vitamins store up in the liver because it's kind of like that storage house or battery pack. And when we eat the liver of a healthy animal, it's going to support our liver because our liver needs B vitamins and vitamin C and vitamin E and vitamin A. And that is why it's so important to get those concentrated source of vitamins and minerals. Keep in mind, ancestrally, our ancestors would have gone for the liver and the kidneys and the spleen first before they even ate muscle meats. Now, it's become so common in our culture to only eat the muscle meats of the animal that we're missing out on a lot of nutrients. Muscle meats are not, they're rich in some nutrients like certain B vitamins and zinc and things like that, but they're not super rich in like vitamin K and vitamin A and vitamin E. And they also contain a high amount of L-methionine, which is an amino acid that can be acidic when not balanced out with other amino acids present in the tendons like collagen and gelatin and bones and liver. And so we got to make sure that we're mimicking nose to tail eating, meaning that our ancestors and our cells know that it needs all of the animal, not just the muscle meat of the animal. Yet, just because it's common in our culture doesn't mean it's normal. And so if we're not going to actually eat nose to tail, we need to mimic nose to tail, which is where organ meats come in, or desiccated liver. And if we're going to take desiccated liver supplements, then we need to probably take them daily. If we're going to actually eat liver, usually eating it once every week or every 2 weeks is enough because it's that nutrient dense. What do you think about DIM? Would it help me to ovulate? You guys know that I hate DIM. I think it's so dangerous. I've seen so many women be like very damaged by DIM, and it only helps with phase 1 of detoxification, which a lot of times is already working okay. And taking DIM can cause more problems if you're having phase 2 detoxification issues. So I've actually seen more harm done with DIM than help. And a lot of times I've seen DIM cause hair loss. I've seen DIM cause women to actually feel like they're going crazy. And I just do not, it's definitely like my least favorite supplement that's popular amongst functional medicine circles right now. It can apply in certain cases. It's not like it's like not good for anyone. There are certain people that truly are helped by DIM, but it's very, very dependent on what's going on in someone's lab tests and what they need. How do you reduce prolactin besides Vitex? I kind of already talked about this on my live on Wednesday. Do things that are going to increase dopamine. Keep in mind, prolactin suppresses dopamine and dopamine suppresses prolactin. And so getting your blood sugar balanced, getting yourself feeling really good, having fun, doing things you enjoy, pursuing your hobbies, spending time with loved ones, cuddling, being in relationships that are fulfilling, spending time doing things that you love or that make you really happy and de-stressed, deep breathing, eating enough sugar or carbohydrate, eating enough protein, just the basics, like really getting your body feeling like it's in a safe and happy place and increasing those dopamine levels. Advice for very lean PCOS with low estrogen and anovulation. Keep in mind, guys, that lean PCOS, there's no such thing as like lean PCOS and fat PCOS. Like, I love when people say they have lean PCOS. They have the same issues as someone who's overweight. It's just expressing in a different way. And I think that the term lean PCOS is really confusing. Remember that PCOS is driven by high cortisol stress. And until we get our cortisol levels down, we will continue to experience our symptoms. And then that can increase estrogen in the tissues, and it will suppress ovulation from occurring, which will lead to low progesterone. So when someone has lean PCOS, or they're just super lean, they're in a hypermetabolic state, gotta get them eating enough. A lot of times someone needs to be eating 2,000 to 2,500 calories if they're not having a period. Sometimes even more. Like, I'm talking eating enough, like eating like a grown-ass woman should eat. And then I'm looking at their exercise habits. Are they over-exercising? Are they on the elliptical, like, for 60 minutes a day? That needs to cease. You know what I mean? Like, let's stop that right now. So just making sure that, first of all, like, the basic stressors are off their body. Eating enough, not over-exercising. And doing that consistently for sometimes 2 or 3 months. And then moving on to bigger things. Like, if the period's still not starting, then making sure that they have the nutrients that they need, making sure that they are not deficient in certain minerals like magnesium or sodium or potassium. You know, you guys know the spiel. Making sure they don't have thyroid issues, running a full thyroid panel. But yeah, I usually recommend first eating plenty of food balanced with protein, carb, and fat. And that's usually going to look around like 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day. And yeah, the advice in Fully Nourished would be very helpful to you. I would just make sure you're eating more than less. Why do you eat gluten-free bread versus whole grain, and which one do you eat? Thank you. Whole grains are super inflammatory. The bran of the whole grain is not meant for your digestion. There's a reason why for like 10,000 years, people have literally extracted the bran of the grain without even having modern technology. They would literally take it and shuck it because they realized people that ate the whole bran of the grain would get sick and have diabetes and disease. Like, they even did this in ancient Egypt, you guys. They refined the flour for a purpose. So I'm not a big fan of whole grains, and I'm definitely not a fan of wheat because it is a trypsin inhibitor. It binds to enzymes and prevents the digestion of proteins in the gut, which can cause long-term problems. You guys know how important protein is. In addition, wheat has been hybridized. So wheat is no longer wheat. Remember, guys, it's a grass now. They actually hybridized wheat with grass and turned it into a hybrid wheat grass. And you're not a cow, you can't digest grass. You don't have 3 stomachs. So now your wheat has way extra chromosomes than it started with thousands of years ago. The only unhybridized wheat is called einkorn wheat, and that's the only wheat that I like. And I'll usually make a sourdough out of it, or I'll use heirloom grains like spelt or something like that, fermented properly. But that's the only gluten I would eat. But I don't do like whole wheat bread. Usually that stuff is just a sham. And especially if it's like Ezekiel or Dave's Killer bread, like those are still just like wheat bread. And unfortunately, all of our wheat has been messed with. How do I balance hormones? I have hyperlactin. I know Vitex helps, but is there anything else? I think I already answered this question like twice. What would cause to wake up angry in the mornings? Low blood sugar. Like, how much calories are you eating? Are you eating enough? Are you eating every 2 or 3 hours? Are you eating a snack before bed? So many times people are just angry and irritable because they're just not eating well. This can even cause depression. This can cause anxiety. And I swear, like, I see it every day that women are just not nourishing themselves. Like, I can't say it enough. Like, they're just eating crappy food or food that's not biologically appropriate. They're under eating sugar. And when I say sugar, I mean sugar. Like, I'm talking about sweet potatoes and fruit juice and honey and coconut sugar and maple syrup. Like, those things are good for you, and they prevent your body from having to eat itself. And when you're eating yourself, you're not in a happy state. So I would say, like, the first thing I would always look to is blood sugar balance, and that is so important. Like, it's more important than anything else. But it could also be, serotonin issues, neurotransmitter issues, hormone issues. I mean, the list could go on and on. But unless you're willing to actually get the proper testing done, you don't want to assume oh, it's this hormone issue or it's this hormone issue. It's just more finding your balance and getting your body balanced. And if that's not working, then you kind of do have to dig into your hormone issues if you want an answer to the problem. Was diagnosed with PCOS in 2015 and just found out it was a misdiagnosis and I was put on the pill for no reason. I want to thank you for helping me go to the new gynecologist and figure this out. Oh, I appreciate that. I'm so glad that you were able to. So unfortunate because so many women do get misdiagnosed with PCOS. I've had, at least a dozen clients that come to me and I say, like, I'm not a doctor, but I would encourage you to go get multiple opinions because this doesn't look like PCOS to me. Like, I'm not a doctor and I'm definitely not, but I do know like the guidelines for diagnosis, and I am aware that a doctor is supposed to have multiple signs of of PCOS in order to actually diagnose someone with PCOS. And many times women are just being slapped with a PCOS diagnosis because they're obese, or they're slapped with a PCOS diagnosis because they aren't ovulating. And I'm like, there's so many other reasons why someone's not ovulating. Like, I've seen people that have severe gut issues not ovulate, and then all of a sudden they get their gut issues figured out and like they're fine, their hormones are great. Or they have thyroid issues and those are still not being treated, and not to mention that birth control makes thyroid issues worse, and that is what's causing their PCOS symptoms. So, I always just encourage, like, sometimes there are women that just get diagnosed when it's kind of like, I think kind of like a laziness, like, oh, I think you just have PCOS. And it's like, no, like they don't even have any androgenic symptoms at all, or high androgens at all. Like that could be something else. And a lot of women have HA or hypothalamic amenorrhea and they get diagnosed with PCOS. And that's so sad to me because a lot of hypothalamic amenorrhea women need like to be eating thousands and thousands of calories, sometimes like 2,000 or 3,000 calories to get their period back because they've been under eating for so long, or they're over exercising. And like, what are the main guidelines for PCOS? Like, cut your calories, lose weight, and exercise. And I'm like, those are like literally the wrong things to do when you have HA. So it's just like, there is a lot of misdiagnosis going on and it's really unfortunate, but I'm so glad you were able to find someone that looked a little deeper for you. I have fatigue at about 2 p.m. every day. How can you keep your energy running all day? I get about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. What are you putting in your fuel tank? Are you putting enough fuel in your tank? But the biggest thing I see is women are skipping breakfast. They have like a small snack at lunch and they think like, oh, my body just runs on thin air. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. So the biggest thing, eat a big breakfast, eat a snack in between breakfast and lunch, eat a good sized lunch, and see if you're still tired at 2 p.m. after 2 weeks. And then if you are, there could be some other issues going on, thyroid, cortisol, there could be some adrenal issues, some mineral imbalances. But I would say 9 times out of 10, women are just not eating enough. They're not keeping their blood sugar stable. They're eating like a toddler, yet they're a grown-ass woman. You know what I mean? So make sure you're eating enough. And make sure you're eating enough protein, carb, and fat. You're not like running off bagels, But yeah, that's the biggest thing. Like that slump is going to be most likely a lack of fuel issue. You're running out of steam by 2 p.m. And then a lot of times what will happen is they run out of steam by 2 p.m. and then by 5 p.m. they have like this weird like second wind. And it's because your body has now shut on that cortisol response, that stress response. Now you're breaking down your muscle tissue, which is going to work against you in the long run. Breaking down muscle tissue equals skinny fat. That's where, like, when we're 40 or 50, we have zero muscle and it's all fat because our body has literally eaten all of our tissues. So it's important to make sure we're eating enough so we don't break down our longevity, which is our muscle tissue. Have you had clients who need estrogen cream in their 30s? I don't really deal with hormones that much. My goal is to get you producing your own hormones. Very rarely does a woman need estrogen. In reality, most women have too much estrogen in their tissues, and that's what's causing the problem. But there have been women that I've seen that really were helped with DHEA and progesterone or pregnenolone. So those are really helpful hormones, but I'm very careful. Like, I don't really think that it's not really my job to implement hormones. If a client's interested in implementing hormones, I will point them in the right direction, give them research to do, but they have to kind of do that on their own accord, and it's not my decision for them. And I'm more focusing on, let's get your body functioning as optimally as possible so it can create its own hormones and respond to those hormones properly. What's a few ways to help yourself detox from anesthesia? Yeah, after surgery, it's one of those things where your body usually just takes care of itself. It can take a few weeks. I've seen anesthesia cause just lack of ovulation for a couple of months after surgery. It is some pretty gnarly stuff, but there's not much you can do, especially if you needed that surgery. So it's just kind of one of those things where I would just do basic things that open up detoxification strategies. I would probably do a couple of coffee enemas myself, a couple castor oil packs extra. I would probably make sure I was drinking my detox lemonade every single day. I would make sure I was eating protein, carb, and fat every couple of hours, getting enough sleep. I would probably hit the sauna a couple more times than I normally do. Just, sweating through the skin, getting it out of the bowels, making sure I'm not constipated. And the body's really good at detoxifying itself when it's given the right tools and environment. I'm curious, you keep saying eating enough, and I'm curious about a minimum caloric requirement you would have for a moderate, active, fully grown woman. I feel best when I'm eating about 2,400 calories. Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, of course, I would say most women shouldn't be below at least 1,800, but of course that depends on their size. I've had women that are 5 foot, and that's going to look very different than a woman who's 5'8" and really active. So I usually say nothing below 1,800 calories, but usually above 2,000 to even 2,500 is better. And then if I have someone that's more of an athlete, like they're doing CrossFit or running or biking and they won't give that up, then I'm pushing them to towards the 3,000 mark if they're metabolically healthy. So, I mean, if you feel best at 2,400 calories, and it sounds like you kind of already know where your sweet spot is, and that's perfect. 2,400 sounds very reasonable. When I say eating enough, I find that a lot of women are super active and super they are eating 1,300 calories. You know what I mean? They're just eating so little, and that would be a problem. But 2,400, that's awesome. What time of the month do you most recommend castor oil packs? If you have a really symptomatic ovulation, then a couple days before you ovulate, but most women's symptoms really are around PMS time, so before their period or during their period. So the luteal phase, that second half of the cycle, is going to be the best time to focus in on those, specifically about 10 days before you're supposed to start your period. How much water do you recommend drinking? I know some people say half your body weight in ounces, but I think I've heard you talk about over drinking. Thanks. Yeah, I don't recommend a certain amount. First of all, we have a built-in signal. It's called thirst that tells us exactly how much water we need to drink. Keep in mind that our metabolic state and our environment is going to really determine how much water we need. There are a lot of people that are dehydrated, but they're not necessarily dehydrated because they're not chugging water. There's probably a lot of you that have experienced drinking water but feeling like it goes right through you, or always drinking water but you're always thirsty, or you pee more than 6 times a day. That's not normal. That's not a sign that you're healthy. That is a sign that something's going on with hydration. There's a hydration issue involved. And so at that point, you're most likely just flushing your minerals out. You're not doing anything good. You're not hydrating your cells. You're just flushing everything out. And so I usually just recommend drinking when you're thirsty. Making sure you're getting lots of hydration from things like fruit juice, bone broth, water-rich foods like fruit, for example, and then making sure that your minerals are balanced, because a lot of people are really depleted in minerals. And then as your minerals get balanced, you'll find yourself more thirsty, you'll find yourself actually feeling hydrated more, and you'll feel a lot better that your water is actually working for you. But yeah, I don't give a certain recommendation because everyone's so different, but usually just following thirst signals is a good idea. And then keeping awareness, if you're doing, hard work out in the hot sun, you're definitely going to need more water than someone who's sitting inside all day. So just being aware of your body. Yeah, I'm 6 foot. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 2,400 calories, definitely. How do you get rid of estrogen buildup in the muscles, strength training? Estrogen doesn't build up in the muscles. It usually builds up in the fat cells and the tissues. So what you're looking at is you're looking at trying to get your cells a lot healthier so that they start to move that those hormones. And it's hard to know if you have estrogen buildup. A lot of times it's just symptoms. Like I've seen a lot of women have low estrogen on a test, yet they have things like sore breasts and PMS and heavy, clotty, crampy periods and moodiness before their period and all of these symptoms that are estrogen based, but they're showing low estrogen. And so in that case, I would sometimes assume that there's most likely estrogen in the tissues that's not being mobilized. So the best way to just get estrogen out of the tissues is to get the body healthier. The body will move estrogen once it feels safe enough to do so, and once you're making enough progesterone and you have proper thyroid function. The two things you need to move estrogen and detoxify estrogen properly are good thyroid function or good metabolism and good amounts of progesterone, which a lot of women don't have because they're not eating really well or they're not fueling their bodies properly, they're not sleeping enough, they don't have enough magnesium, vitamin E, that type of thing. So a lot of women Fully Nourished right now, at the 2 or 3 month mark, they're starting to see a lot of, well, they're pretty much at the 3.5 month mark at this point, but they're seeing a lot of progress with their bodies. But they're also seeing some estrogen dominant symptoms start to flare up. They were, they felt really good for a little while, and then all of a sudden, I started to feel like sore breasts for a second there, and I had like a really weird period. And then the next cycle was great, was fine. It's just because estrogen is now moving and mobilizing because they're supporting their metabolism. So would you start these detox strategies before and after castor oil packs over liver? Yeah. I would do it before and after. So just focusing on really healthy liver pre-op and then afterwards, after I healed a little bit. I wouldn't do it right away, right when I came out, but I would do that support. Is Pilates a workout you suggest? If you enjoy it, absolutely. If not, then no. But yeah, Pilates is a great workout. If you have hydration issues, what does this come from and how do you fix it? The biggest thing it will come from is stress and mineral deficiencies. So a lot of times we've gone through really chronic stress for a very long period of time, which has really made us deplete magnesium and potassium and sodium. And so we have to get our minerals up. We got to make sure we're getting adequate amounts of sodium, adequate amounts of potassium, usually from our food is fine, and then adequate amounts of magnesium, which usually has to be supplemented. And then if that doesn't fix hydration issues, you have to look at blood sugar balance. Are you eating every 3 to 4 hours? Are you, are you under a lot of stress? What are your habits like? Because that can cause hydration issues. But as your body begins to function better, you begin to see your body hydrate better and you don't pee as much throughout the day. If you're peeing a ton, that's usually a sign that things are not working out too well. What do you think of psyllium husk for constipation? It can sometimes work really well and then sometimes not work at all. So it just really depends on the person. But I think as a kind of a little bit of a support here and there, it's totally harmless. It's just getting reliant upon it every single day that would be a problem. Yeah. All right, guys, I'll do a last call for questions. I'll hang around for 5 more minutes to just make sure nothing else comes in. But yeah, we finally got through all the questions. Yay. Sometimes I feel like I don't get through the questions at all. And I kind of like that feeling. I know you guys have tons of questions. Happy Friday, Katya. Antioxidant intake. Sorry. Maybe I missed your... if I'm not sure what you mean by antioxidant intake, but antioxidants can come from, all types of foods, and we only need antioxidants when we're oxidizing a bunch of junk and turning it into free radicals. So the goal is to actually not oxidize a bunch of things so that we don't have a bunch of free radicals floating around. But yeah, we get plenty of antioxidants from fruits and vegetables and things like that. So I don't usually worry about antioxidants. Can you recommend food sources of calcium other than dairy? Haven't had dairy for nearly 10 years. Hope to reintroduce it slowly, but no, I'm not getting enough calcium. Yeah, greens can be a source of calcium, especially if they're cooked in some type of saturated fat like tallow or ghee or something like that. But no, that's why I kind of... I encourage the intake of dairy is because it's hard to get calcium. Sometimes we do have to supplement it. You can make it from eggshells. You can make a calcium carbonate just by sterilizing eggshells, boiling them up, and then putting them in the oven just on a low heat to kind of get them dry, and then grind them in a coffee grinder to make like a calcium powder and throw it in smoothies or whatever. But a lot of it can cause like stomach issues because it's pretty harsh, so you want to go really slow. But yeah, I mean, honestly, the best calcium source is going to be dairy. But until then, like a calcium carbonate powder or cooked leafy greens can be a good support. Calcium is good for PCOS. Yeah, I mean, all nutrients and minerals are good for PCOS. As many nutrients as possible that we can get into our bodies, the better. Advice for night shift sleep schedule. I switch back and forth from days and nights. Ooh, that's rough. Well, I would say like the first goal would be to try to get that to stop happening if you can. And I know like sometimes you're just in a rock and a hard place, but some people are saying like, it's no big deal. And I'm like, it's a big deal if you can control it. So I would make sure it's really dark when you go to sleep. It's worse to switch back and forth because your body's just so confused constantly. But I would make sure that when you're sleeping, you're not just wearing a sleep mask, you're actually completely blacking out your room. So your body does think it's evening. And then during your night shifts, you would want to expose yourself to a lot of light, fluorescent lighting, LED lighting, making sure that your body thinks it's daytime at night would help you have that kind of circadian shift of being dark at night and light during the day. And then you would do that on your opposite schedule as well. Keep your room very, 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 very dark, and during the day get lots of exposure to sunlight. So you're truly convincing your body like, hey, it's nighttime right now and it's daytime right now when you're exposed to light. So that's probably the best option. I'm trying to think of like what else you could use. Some people will use melatonin to kind of have like a faux melatonin secretion, but I find that works better when people have like just a constant night shift. I would be a little wary of using that when you're switching back and forth because it's just going to be kind of confusing. But I would mostly just work with the lighting as best as I possibly could. Does dairy and calcium decrease joint inflammation? I noticed my muscles and joints have felt amazing since incorporating milk cheese, especially after workouts. Oh yeah, I mean, you need a lot of calcium, especially for building bones, but also for, just overall muscular health. Calcium is responsible for the contraction of the muscle, and magnesium is responsible for that relaxation. So they're both really important for like the muscles and the joints. But that's amazing that you're feeling really good after a workout. I know I experienced the same thing when I tied dairy back in. Not sure if my question showed up earlier. Why do you eat gluten-free bread versus whole grain? And is there a gluten-free one you suggest? I kind of already talked about it more in depth, and I'll just kind of like do a little summary. Whole grains are not healthy for you, period, end of story. That's a food pyramid lie. Keep in mind, people have spent people from thousands and thousands of years ago, as early as ancient Egypt, were using not so modern tools to refine their grains for a reason. They saw that eating the bran of the grain caused things like what we now would see as diabetes and gout and early death and disease. Like they even knew that refining their grains were important. And so I'm not a big fan of eating the bran of the grains. I'm also not a big fan of wheat because it's now grass and it's not purely a grain anymore. It's wheatgrass, and you're not a cow. You don't have 3 stomachs, so you can't digest it very well. I don't really recommend gluten-free breads. I kind of use them from time to time when I'm lazy, and I'll use Canyon Bakehouse or something, but I actually prefer to make a properly fermented sourdough out of heirloom grains like einkorn flour, spelt flour, something like that. But einkorn wheat is the only wheat that has not been hybridized into a grass. Sorry, I was trying to ask about your thoughts on cocoa powder. I read it was a good source of magnesium. Yeah, cocoa powder can be a good source of magnesium, but to get enough magnesium, you'd have to eat a lot of cocoa powder. So it's good and tastes good, but I wouldn't excessively consume it. Hi Jessica, I've been struggling with migraine the last 6 weeks, and after I stopped eating dairy and OJ, it went away. Thoughts? I have used too much ibuprofen, so I had to do something. Yeah, if that's not working for you, it's not working for you. Maybe those foods were too pro-metabolic for you and they're removing estrogen too quickly, or maybe those foods are just really not working for your gut. Sometimes if your digestion is really, really poor, those foods can sometimes not work for you. Every person is really different. So whatever that is, you should listen to it, and I would maybe experiment with less liquid and more solid foods. Maybe you need that for blood sugar balance. Your thoughts on pure gum spirits of turpentine for Lyme or parasites? Is it safe? Thanks. No, I would never take turpentine internally. What would cause uterine problems to hold pee when exercising? Usually excessive estrogen or prolactin can cause urinary incontinence. Those are the two things that I usually look into, but prolactin specifically can cause urinary incontinence for sure. Adrenaline as well, but estrogen is what relaxes the muscles in the vagina, but also can in the urethra. So you kind of have to keep an eye on estrogen levels, but prolactin can do that as well. Hi, I'm wondering why homemade long fermented sourdough would cause a major histamine response. Maybe you're just not digesting it well. Maybe your gut's at a place where it doesn't digest well at all. Or are you making your own sourdough starter? Like, maybe the yeast in your environment is not working for your body very well, because the wild yeast on that sourdough is you're eating that internally. Sometimes the longer you ferment it, the more B vitamins that grow on it. So it's one of those things where you need to kind of like determine what's going on. I would maybe try fermenting a little shorter of a time, like 1 to 2 days, as opposed to how long you're fermenting it. So I would experiment a little bit. But then what type of wheat are you using? Are you using fortified wheat that has iron and folic acid in it? That's your problem. What's the benefit of taking aspirin for liver health? Thank you. I highly recommend looking more into Ray Peat's research. He has a few articles on his website that are very enlightening. But aspirin is acetylsalicylic or salicylic acid, and it is extracted from plants like white willow bark and things like that. So it blocks prostaglandin production, it helps with free fatty acids, it blocks something called lipolysis, so it does a few different things, but it is very anti-inflammatory. Any thoughts on why I'd be waking up with flushed cheeks? How's your blood sugar response? Most likely stress. Like at that point, is your heart racing? Are you feeling anxiety? Are you feeling super stressed out? Like what's going on? So I would look to blood sugar balance, and I would probably try to eat a snack before bed that had carbohydrate and some fat before I went to bed. Chlorine buildup in blood, is that bad? Yeah, because if chlorine is high, then iodine is going to be depleted. But yeah, that's definitely something to be worried about. Did the doctor tested that talk to you about it? I know you've told this before, but I just wanted to ask about the aspirin and coffee concoction you talked about for hair. I don't use coffee, you guys. I use caffeine. There's a difference. So I usually will powder aspirin, and then I will add caffeine powder that I buy on Amazon, and I'll dilute it or dissolve it in some warm water and spray it onto my roots. That will stimulate hair growth and block inflammation. Thoughts on the carnivore diet? It's super dangerous. So many women are experiencing anovulation on the carnivore diet, and they're acting like it's no big deal. Like, oh, I haven't ovulated in 3 years on the carnivore diet, but I'm skinnier than ever. And I'm like, what the heck? And then what happens is the carnivore diet causes you to create your own glucose, and you start to eat your tissues, specifically the thymus gland, which is really dangerous because there are people that actually have eaten completely through the tissue of their thymus gland, and their thymus gland is responsible for immune response. And so when your immunity is not, when your immune system is completely not functional, when you go to tie all those foods back in, because you eventually will, you can't sustain a carnivore diet forever. I'm sorry, you just won't. You're going to have worse food allergies than you've ever experienced in your life, and your digestion is going to be absolutely wrecked because only eating meat causes a lot of strains of bacteria in the gut to die off, which is why a lot of people see benefit at first. They think like, oh my gosh, my inflammation is gone and all these things, because cortisol and adrenaline is through the absolute roof suppressing inflammation. That's not good. You're eating your own tissues in the process. And then when you go to eat foods again, you're going to have more of a problem than ever. And sometimes there are people that have been on carnivore diets for 2 years or a low carb diet for 2 years that have completely destroyed their guts. They're still years later recovering because certain strains of bacteria have completely died off to the point where they can't even tolerate carbohydrates any longer. And it's very unfortunate. I feel very bad for them. Thanks for the ideas. Unfortified organic, all-purpose, because I react to barley and can't have it at all. Okay, I would try an einkorn flour if you can get your hands on it and try that instead, just because wheat, remember, even if it's organic and not fortified, it still has been hybridized, and it's still partially grass. And that's unfortunate. That is what humans have done, but unfortunately that's what we have to deal with. So I would try an einkorn heirloom grain that is still, I think it's 27 chromosomes, and see if that's not a problem, because the grasses could be causing you to react. Better to do steam room sauna before or after workout, or both? I like before because it warms up my muscles so I get a better workout, but that's just me personally. What foods or supplements would be safe to use if iodine is low with high thyroid antibodies? Maybe a mineral multivitamin would fix all imbalances. Unfortunately, there's no magic pill, and mineral multivitamins are not going to fix anything, especially if you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. High thyroid antibodies is not necessarily contraindicated for iodine. You just have to, if you're going to supplement iodine, you first have to make sure all your other minerals and precursors are good. Vitamin C, selenium, zinc, magnesium, potassium, sodium, calcium, all those need to be monitored, and then your antibodies need to be monitored. Usually when you're supplementing iodine and you have high antibodies, I recommend getting an antibody test every 3 to 4 weeks, or even sooner if you suspect that you are really sensitive to it. Thanks. Is rice a good gluten-free carb? White rice or brown rice would you prefer? Rice can be a good gluten-free carb for some people, but it is high in arsenic, specifically brown rice. The bran tends to store a lot of arsenic. So I find that a lot of people that eat rice a lot, especially brown rice a lot, have high arsenic. So I usually recommend white rice, but it can still be high in arsenic. So I recommend boiling your rice and then draining off the water, like making it more like pasta than you would rice. I've been drinking raw milk and felt great, then ate cottage cheese from the store and it broke me out. Does that mean I'm allergic to dairy, or it was low quality dairy? What was in your cottage cheese? Was it just cottage cheese, or were there gums and fillers and additives? That would be something to look into. But cottage cheese is pretty much pure casein, so some people only do well with milk at first, and it takes them a while before they can digest other things, especially cheeses. But yeah, cottage cheese can have a lot of additives in it, so you have to always flip it around and look at those ingredients. And if it has gums, like guar gum or carabine gum or acacia gum, those can be problems. Any tips for lowering androgens and testosterone? Remember guys, androgens and testosterone are always high for a protective mechanism. Most women have elevated estrogen in their tissues, lots of inflammation in the body, and so the body is doing the only thing that it can do to protect the ovarian tissue and raising testosterone. So the question is never, how do I lower androgens? It is, why is my androgens high in the first place, and fix that issue and your androgens will lower. A lot of times it's simply imbalanced blood sugar. Women are not balancing their blood sugar. They're not eating enough carbs. They're not eating enough protein. They're eating too much of one and too little of the other. Their stress is really high. They're not eating until noon, and they're not eating very frequently. They're eating kind of sporadically throughout the day. Their body thinks they're in a freaking famine, So the first thing that we need to translate to our body is safety. And the second thing we've got to do is strength train. We've got to make sure we're building muscle. We've got to make sure we're sleeping, we're getting sunlight, and our progesterone levels are good, because progesterone is anti-androgenic. What brand of probiotic would you recommend after heavy courses of antibiotic? I don't recommend probiotics after antibiotics. There's even a clinical study that was done that shows that if you use probiotics after antibiotics, you usually make the imbalance 10 times worse. So I would recommend just letting the body be for a couple of months after antibiotics, and then checking in and doing inventory with the gut, and then considering if you need to do probiotics or not. But I wouldn't really mess with things until the gut rebalances. Because what's happening when you're on antibiotics, you guys, is you're wiping out a third of everything, just wiping it out. And if you go and think about it, you've created space And so now you're going to implement wild strains of bacteria and let them possibly proliferate. That's not a good idea. So you want to let the gut rebalance itself, and then you would think about, okay, if the balance has kind of been messed up, then you would go in and kind of rebalance it yourself. Thoughts on full day fasting and intermittent fasting. That's a good way to start losing hair and cause a lot of issues. Remember, you guys, when you're fasting, you're not running off of thin air, you're running off of your own muscle. Why can I handle Siggy's yogurt and sometimes cheese, but not milk? Well, yogurt is fermented, and so sometimes people do better with yogurts, and I don't know why. Like, really, I don't know. Sometimes it's because there's actually sugar added to the yogurt, which helps digest the dairy. And then cheese is just casein. So sometimes you have a whey problem. You're reacting to the whey in the milk. And so keep in mind, milk has 2 proteins in it, whey and casein protein. And then it also has 1 sugar in it called lactose. And you need this enzyme called lactase to digest lactose. And so cheese doesn't have much lactose in it. It doesn't have much whey, and yogurt doesn't have much lactose in it and doesn't have a lot of casein. So it could be that you're reacting to the lactose, or you don't make enough of that lactase enzyme. A lot of people need to implement milk so slowly and very gradually. Like, I'm talking about like a tablespoon a day for like a couple weeks, and then 2 tablespoons, and then 3, and so on until they can tolerate milk. What's your favorite thing to eat before bed? I'm trying not to eat after dinner, but need something to quiet my growling stomach before bed. Yeah, my favorite thing is chocolate milk, and I use, what's it called? Strauss Organic. They have really delicious chocolate milk, and I mix in a couple tablespoons of collagen into that, and that's been like my favorite for like the past month or 2. But sometimes I'll also make like a pudding that has like gelatin in it and chocolate and milk and butter, or I'll make like a fudge, and I'll add like collagen, butter, sugar, chocolate, something that's going to have some sugar and some protein and some fat, just, and it usually is desserty because I like something like that before bed. Supplementing iodine for Hashimoto's, good idea or bad? Also, I heard supplementing iodine helps with acne. It's not good nor bad. It's that you need to be in the right place. Iodine is a process, you guys. You don't just like go and supplement iodine like randomly. You're not like, oh, I'm just going to supplement iodine today. Like, you got to make sure your calcium levels are at a good level. Remember, iodine decalcifies things. You have to make sure you have enough magnesium and sodium and potassium to handle it, or it's going to cause very harsh detox reactions. And then you need to make sure that you're taking the cofactors needed: vitamin C, zinc, and selenium. So iodine supplementation is a process, and I never recommend just randomly supplementing. And when you have high antibodies, you must monitor your antibodies while supplementing iodine. So I would monitor them every 3 to 4 weeks while on iodine, or even sooner. Thoughts on primrose oil? It really helped one of my friends' acne. I'm not a big fan. It's PUFA, and all it's going to do is be immunosuppressive. So a lot of times what will happen is when you stop it, you're just going to get your symptoms back. But some people really like it, so it just kind of depends. I recently left the country. I've been abroad 2 months, and my periods are light and short, but I'm feeling exhausted. Any tips? I rest, but what about food? Well, what have you been eating? Are you eating very differently? Are you eating sporadically? Travel is stressful on the body, and then on top of it, a lot of times we're not eating as frequently, we're not hydrating as well, we're not taking care of ourselves as much, and so it can be sometimes too stressful for some people's bodies. So I would first look at how much I'm eating, am I eating frequently, keeping my blood sugar balanced, and that would kind of be the first thing I would try to do. I saw an article that high-fat diets impair cognitive function, another BS. No, high-fat diets I'm not a fan of high-fat diets. I'm definitely not a fan of high-fat diets. You need a certain amount of fat to function, but I'm not a fan of high-fat diets. There's like studies coming out every single day that are just showing more and more problems with eating a high-fat diet. I was on antibiotics, which made me not able to do the milk and cheese I mentioned before. Can't even do lactate milk. I'm doing lactate pills, which helps a little. Yeah, I mean, that can wipe out some bacteria. Sometimes making sure you're doing the raw carrot salad every single day can really help with digestion of dairy. But sometimes it can just take some time to get that bacteria back. Since Brazil nuts are PUFAs, would you still suggest them as a selenium source? Just depends. A lot of times people are already depleted in selenium, and so they need more selenium than less, but they can be a good source of selenium. I'm not like worried about a ton of PUFAs, especially if you're only doing like 2 Brazil nuts a day, but it just really depends on what someone's selenium levels are. Grapeseed oil or avocado oil for cooking? Neither. Butter or coconut oil all the way. Sounds like raw carrot salad is your desert island go-to. Yeah, the raw carrot salad is for gut issues. It pretty much is like how you kind of change the microbiome in a gentle way. What is a high-fat diet? How many grams? I usually eat around 72 or 80. I always feel like I can overdo it with the fats. I would just say like more than 30% of your calories from fat. I usually recommend anywhere from 20 to 30% of calories from fat. Just not going like on a high fat, keto type diet. All right, guys, I love you. Instagram's cutting me off. Thank you so much for joining me. This will be up for the next 24 hours. I'll see you soon.